The ceratopsian dinosaurs are probably my favorite group, aside from the therizinosaurs. Though they have a very copy my homework but change it up a little to not make it obvious energy, they also have some of the most interesting skulls of any group. As I continue on my path across the ceratopsian family tree, I figured why not move on to one of the most devilishly stylish of them, good old Diabloceratops. Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument is the U.S. designated national monument set up to protect the Grand Staircase, the Kaiparowits Plateau, and the canyons of the Escalante across southern Utah. It was set up back in 1996 and currently covers 1.8 million acres of land. On top of protecting the natural biodiversity of the area, the monument also contains within its borders a slew of fossils from the Cretaceous period, which help to outline the beginning of the later sections of this period of time, and the evolution of many of the major groups that would see the K-Pig mass extinction. Plenty fossil animals remain to be prepared, studied, and described from this region. Only a handful have been able to get publications out over the last 2 decades, due to one reason or another. One of the first were a pair of frilly horny skulls that would go on to get a sick name worthy of a band mascot. The geology of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument is vast and of course technically goes all the way back to the start of time, with Proterozoic basement rocks followed by Cambrian, Devonian, Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, Permian, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, and then Paleocene-Eocene rocks. For the area we care about right now, there is the Straight Cliffs, Wahweap, and Kaiparowits formations. Formation, of course, just being the geologic term used to describe a layer of rock that is consistent within itself and different from those above and below it. All the way back in 2001, paleontologists from the Museum of Northern Arizona, University of Oklahoma, and Weber State University were traipsing around the outcrops of the monument looking for Cretaceous-aged fossils. This was the beginning of the Wahweap Project, which aimed to inventory fossil localities in the lower sandstone and middle mudstone members of the Wahweap Formation across the southern end of the Kaiparowits Basin to serve as a management tool for the BLM. Just a heads up, a member is a smaller layer within a formation. Last Chance Skull. Then, in 2002, paleontologist Don DeBlue discovered a skull weathering out of a sandstone ledge near the middle of the middle mudstone member of the Wahweap Formation, near Last Chance Creek on the north side of Reynolds Point in the eastern Wahweap outcrop belt. The collection of bone on the surface and cleaning of the block around the bone revealed a nearly complete skull lying on its left side. Part of the right side had eroded away, with much of the skull still embedded in the rock. The team DeBlue was with spent 8 days using a gas-powered cut-off saw to separate the block containing the skull from the surrounding ledge. In September of 2005, arrangements were finalized by the BLM to airlift the block containing the skull out of the backcountry. The block was then transported by helicopter to a truck and then driven to the UGS preparation lab in Salt Lake City, Utah. More than 800 hours of preparation by DeBlue were needed to expose the beautifully preserved skull. It became known as the Last Chance Skull and was the first from this area and time that could be identified as one of the first of the centrosaurs, but we will get more into that later. Nipple Butte Skull. Joshua A. Smith, while working for the UGS, discovered a skull of a ceratopsid dinosaur during a July 16, 1998 UGS Paleontological Survey of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument in the Lower Wahweap Formation at the top of the lower sandstone member on the south end of the Kaiparowits Plateau, northwest of Nipple Butte. This skull had been exposed on the surface for many years and had broken into 3 major sections. It was obviously an important specimen that required salvage. The skull was collected in August of 2000 by the UGS, aided by the University of Utah and Utah Friends of Paleontology. The skull was found 1/3 of a mile off an established dirt road, and because wheeled vehicles are not permitted off-road, the 3 large sandstone blocks were dragged out by an 8-person team using the roof of a Ford Mustang as a sled. This skull required hundreds of hours of preparation, but it shared some characteristics with the skull that would be found later and given a proper scientific designation. Both were described together in the same paper published in 2010. In that 2010 paper, James Kirkland, American paleontologist and geologist responsible for the discoveries and descriptions of a ton of southwestern dinosaurs, and Don DeBlue described the 2 skulls and gave the better of the 2 the name Diabloceratops eatonii. This better skull, the last chance skull, specimen number UMNH VP 16699, is the holotype of the genus and species. Diabloceratops means devil-horned face, in honor of the brow and frill horns of the last chance skull. The species name, eatonii, honors Jeffrey G. Eaton, a paleontologist at Weber State University in Ogden, Utah, in recognition for his extensive work on the Cretaceous vertebrate faunas of southern Utah, and his role in the establishment of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. The last chance skull preserves the entire left side of the skull, including the midline. The skull was sagittally sectioned by erosion through the right side, resulting in the loss of the right squamosal bone, half of the right postorbital horn, jugal, and part of the right maxilla bone. A number of fragments from the right side were recovered. A rib had come to rest between the 2 horns lying against the left side of the face. A partial splenial was also found adjacent to the skull during excavation. The bones of the skull are very well preserved and almost completely undistorted. Sutures are well fused but can be distinguished in most cases, and the epoccipital bones on the squamosal and parietal are well fused, indicating that this specimen was an adult when it died. When the other side of the skull is filled in based on the rule of symmetry, we get this thing. It shows a much narrower skull than other horned dinosaurs, members of the Ceratopsia, but with a very deep and blunt schnoz. In fact, it is, or at least it was when it was published, the most blunt-nosed of any horned dinosaur known. That is, proportionally. It had a blunt beak that arched up into a huge bulbous nasal region. There is said to be a nose horn along the arch of the nose, but I can't really see it besides the little nubbin right here. By nose horn, the original description probably means a blunt, reduced thing that would later become enlarged and pointed in other horned dinosaur groups. Aside from the snoot, Diabloceratops had these large, elevated orbits, or eye openings, that projected out from the skull a tad and fused into the brow and the horns atop those brows so that it all formed one hard fused unit. These horns are nowhere near as large as they are in later horned dinosaurs and resemble much more the horns of earlier horned dinosaurs like Zuniceratops and Tyrannoceratops, jutting forwards but also bending up and back. The frill of Diabloceratops, made of bits of bone from the back of the skull, is rather short. This thing looks proportionally smaller than the frill of the earlier Protoceratops and Zuniceratops. It gets no awards here. The frill is fringed in little bumps of bone called epoccipitals that give the frill a scalloped appearance. The last of these bones is most of the equation that gave it the name Diabloceratops. The animal had a pair of super long horns jutting out of the top and middle of the frill that bent upwards and forwards over the frill before bending to the sides a tad, literally carried around a pair of devil horns. Based on all of the characteristics observed in the skull, Kirkland and DeBlue placed Diabloceratops as the earliest diverging member of the Centrosaurinae group of the Ceratopsidae group, the Ceratopsidae being the group that contains all of the horned dinosaurs that have horns, except for the earliest members like Zuniceratops, and also excluding all the weird sheer-jawed piglets of the Protoceratops grade groups. The Ceratopsidae is divided broadly into the Chasmosaur and Centrosaur groups. The Chasmosaurs tended to have larger brow horns and smaller nose horns, and enormous square-shaped frills perforated by even larger windows. The Centrosaurs are broadly known to have huge bulbous noses, smaller frills with smaller holes but much larger frill decorations, and usually much larger nose horns than brow horns. Then, in 2018, an author team led by Kentaro Chiba described some new remains from the Centrosaur Medusaceratops from the Judith River Formation. In this paper, they entered the Medusaceratops stuff into a new phylogeny that included Diabloceratops and another very early, very Diabloceratops-like Centrosaur from the exact same time and place that might actually turn out to be Diabloceratops, Machairoceratops. These tests found that Diabloceratops and Machairoceratops form the earliest diverging group of Centrosaurs far removed from the rest of the tree. In the time since the description of Diabloceratops, an entirely new group of Centrosaur was found, the bull-horned Nasutoceratopsins. It has also been found that the general Centrosaur group can be further divided into the Pachyrhinosaurines and Centrosaurines, as part of a new tree, the Eucentrosaura. Since Diabloceratops is known only from skull material, not much is known about its body. Despite this seeming roadblock, the body of other dinosaurs closely related to it have been found, and they can provide a vague idea of what kind of body carried this devilishly decorated noggin. With all that information about the skull and its evolutionary relationships under our belt, we can get a vague idea of what kind of body may have been attached to Diabloceratops' skull. Let's bring in Mr. Man from Animal Planet's The Most Extreme to get a good idea of how big Diabloceratops may have been. Based on the size of the skull compared to the skull and body sizes and proportions of Zuniceratops and more advanced Centrosaurs, Diabloceratops may have been as large as 15 feet, 4.5 meters in length, and up to 1.4 tons. Thanks, Mr. Man. The body was probably not as lithe and streamlined as that of Zuniceratops or Tyrannoceratops, and may have been more like what is seen in Centrosaurs like Ainosaurus and Styracosaurus. This is both due to the size and evolutionary placement of Diabloceratops. Zuniceratops had somewhat of a tall and thin tail, similar to the tall tailbones of Protoceratops and cousins. This is likely not to have been present here in Diabloceratops, but that is entirely hypothetical either way. Since the tailbones are some of the rarer elements of ceratopsian skeletons, I wouldn't doubt that some groups adapted taller tailbones independently for whatever advantage that form may have had. Now that we know about how Diabloceratops was found, the very little amount of it that has been found, and what it may have looked like, we should probably take a stroll back in time to place Diabloceratops in the context of its environment. Diabloceratops comes from the Wahweap Formation of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. This chunk of Earth dates from the Campanian stage of the late Cretaceous, about 82.2 to 77.3 million years ago. This chunk of rock can be subdivided into 4 smaller segments. The Last Chance Creek member, 82.17 to 81.55 million years ago. Reynolds Point member, 81.55 to 80.61 million years ago. The Coyote Point member, 80.61 to 79 million years ago. And the Pardner Canyon member, 79 to 77.29 million years ago. Diabloceratops comes from the bottommost and oldest slice of the Wahweap, the Last Chance member, making it 82.17 to 81.55 million years old. The remains of Diabloceratops have been estimated to specifically come from the section of this section of time that dates to 81.27 million years ago. When Diabloceratops was alive, the climate was so different than it is today. It was a hothouse world because there were no large deposits of ice at the poles, though it may have snowed every now and again in very specific areas of the globe. Utah was then located near the very edge of a continent which has been named Laramidia. You see, North America was split down the middle like a pair of unruly cellulitic butt cheeks thanks to the complete lack of ice at the poles. A shallow inland sea split the continent from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. This seaway has been named the Western Interior Seaway for obvious reasons. This splitting of the continent in two had major consequences for the development of life throughout the Cretaceous period. It didn't fully recede till the time after the asteroid struck, but the seaway did shrink over time. The Western Interior Seaway was at its widest during Diabloceratops' time, virtually totally separating southern Laramidia from the rest of North America. Lakes, floodplains, and east-flowing rivers were among the habitats of dinosaurs. The Wahweap Formation is a component of the Grand Staircase area, which stretches south from Bryce Canyon National Park through Zion National Park and into the Grand Canyon. Rapid sedimentation and other findings point to a moist, seasonal environment, some of that evidence being the presence of other organisms in the rocks, like nurse sharks, bamboo sharks, sclerorhynchoid saw skates, guitarfish, hybodont sharks, sawfish, a ton of rayfin fish, all of which indicates more tropical or at least very warm climates. The Wahweap Formation also shows a substantial amount of invertebrate activity, ranging from fossilized insect burrows in petrified logs to various mollusks that characterize the shell beds. Large fossilized crabs are common at most shellbed sites in the Wahweap, and over 1,900 gastropod specimens of 4 likely genera have been unearthed in the formation's siltstone. A cherry on top of this moist climate sundae is the presence of at least 3 types of salamanders. You don't get these kinds of critters in a hot, arid region. Diabloceratops occupied an interesting place in its ecosystem. It was neither the largest nor the smallest dinosaur here. It is one of the smallest of the larger ceratopsians and would have been quick work for plenty of later predators, but here it, as far as is known, only had to contend with a single tyrannosaur, Lythronax. This teardrop-skulled predator may have stood about twice as tall as Diabloceratops, but was not hugely longer. It may have been able to use its agility and strong jaws to overpower the Diabloceratops, but the horns and frills of these dinosaurs weren't only for show. No sauropods are yet known from this formation, nor the one above it, so it may just be that none were present during this period of time, or in this region at this time. But it also remains possible that some titanosaurs were skulking around the place, though their Allosaurian top dogs had long since been extirpated from the continent. No, sauropods were not the largest things here. That honor goes to the hadrosaurs. Contrary to popular belief, hadrosaurs were no joke. Though they did not carry any dazzling arsenals of weapons, they were very large, very fast, and very bulky. They carried huge beaks powered by immense muscles, as well as tails that were so well integrated into their bodies that they acted as a springboard from which to fling their bodies across the ground with the aid of their gigantic caudofemoralis, thigh, and calf muscles. This was a powerful weapon to tamp down even the most gregarious of tyrannosaurs. The largest of these hadrosaurs here was a possible form of Acrostavis at 8.15 meters in length and 3,150 kilograms. The more well-known fossils from this genus are a tad smaller at 6.35 meters and 1,285 kilograms. The larger hadrosaur goes by the name Adalallophus, but some researchers suspect it is just a large member of the Acrostavis genus. Aside from those, only Machairoceratops is known of the dinosaur fauna. Plenty of fragmentary bits and bobs and specimens that have yet to be published are known and indicate a much higher diversity, including the likes of the club-carrying Ankylosaurids, the huge honk-nosed Brachylophosaurs, 3 other centrosaurs, the sawtooth-tailed Nodosaurids, some possible bone-headed Pachycephalosaurids, and some flute-headed Saurolophine hadrosaurs. Since the number of dinosaurian groups remained largely stable throughout the latter parts of the Cretaceous period, I would not at all be surprised for the diversity in groups at this point in time to be similar to what is seen at the end of the Cretaceous. Dromaeosaurs, troodontids, possibly very early forms of therizinosaurs, oviraptorosaurs, and ornithomimosaurs too. Most of these are Asian immigrants to North America, but if tyrannosaurs were already here, perhaps ancient forebears to the other theropod groups had established themselves too. Just need to find their bones. Aside from the dinosaurs, fish, and invertebrates, there were also plenty of turtles, like Compsomys, and crocodilians, and mammals of all kinds. Trace fossils are relatively abundant in the Wawebe Formation and suggest the presence of crocodilomorphs, as well as ornithischian and theropod dinosaurs. In 2010, a unique trace fossil was discovered that suggests a predator-prey relationship between dinosaurs and primitive mammals. The trace fossil includes at least 2 fossilized mammalian den complexes, as well as associated digging grooves, presumably caused by a Maniraptoran dinosaur. The proximity indicates a case of probable active predation of the burrow inhabitants by the animals that made the claw marks. All in all, a very hustling and bustling ecosystem. That's about all I have for you about the devil-horned face of Utah. There really isn't a lot to know at this time, but considering the immense diversity in the horned dinosaurs and how easy it is for their skulls to fossilize, I would not be surprised that more Diabloceratops fossils are out there waiting to be found, or sitting in collections, or being actively prepared and described right now. For more interesting stories about nature, the history of life, or what goes bump in the night, subscribe, like this video, drop a comment in the comment section below, and hit the bell icon to stay in the know with everything Edge. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to Elephant Tier patrons Abby Smith, Arda Bayer, Biotaverse, Cherry Shaw, Chris Frampton, Christoph Hubbinger, Dinosaur, Ed Peretz, Isaiah Garza, Jax the Hacks, Natty Cat, PA Brew News, Ray, Rudy Redgrave, Smiling Walrus, Staniforth Hopkins, Steve Bradshaw, Thea Svensson, and Extraterrestrial. As well as my Tapas tier Tyrannosaurus patrons, Admin, Antron, Aphid Kirby, Cyber, Dana Manchester, Danny Van Heck, Henry Brennan, Iberospinus, Iron Bladesman, Joshua Mana, Panic, Radio 404, Robert Kessler, Ruben Zachariah, Swaffles is Weird, Teeny Dragator, and The Dogman.